On the morning of May 5th, 1945, a single American Sherman tank rolls through the Austrian town of Kufstein. Its tracks grind against cobblestones still slick with overnight rain. The commander, a 24-year-old Texan named Jack Lee, stands in the open turret hatch, scanning rooftops and windows with eyes that haven't closed in 36 hours. Behind him, in the cramped hull, his crew monitors the radio for orders that have grown increasingly confused over the past week. The Third Reich is dying, but no one has told the Reich. Somewhere to the south, in the direction Lee's tank is now pointed, a medieval fortress called Schloss Itter clings to a rocky outcrop above the Inn Valley. Lee has never heard of it. In a few hours he will fight his last battle of the war within its walls, and he will do so alongside German soldiers wearing the same uniform as the men who have been trying to kill him for the past 11 months. This is the story of the Battle of Castle Itter. It is a story that reads like fiction but is not. Every name is real, every date is documented, every improbable twist is attested by multiple eyewitness accounts, military records, and the subsequent investigations of historians who, decades later, still shake their heads at the sheer strangeness of what happened in those final hours before the guns of Europe finally fell silent. To understand how an American tank commander came to trust a German major he had every reason to shoot on sight, to understand how former prime ministers of France found themselves barricading windows with antique furniture while SS troops advanced on their position, to understand how a Czech cook on a bicycle became the unlikely hinge on which the entire rescue turned, we must first understand the particular madness of the European war's final week. By May 1st, 1945, Adolf Hitler is dead. He has shot himself in the Führer bunker beneath the rubble of Berlin, and his body has been burned in the Reich Chancellery garden according to his final instructions. The city above him lies in ruins. Soviet troops occupy the Reichstag. The war by any rational measure is over, but wars do not end by rational measure. They end when the last soldier stops fighting, and in the mountains of Austria and Bavaria, in the dense forests of the Alpine Redoubt, thousands of Waffen-SS troops have not stopped fighting. Many of them never will. The idea of the Alpine Redoubt, the Alpenfestung, has haunted Allied planning for months. German propaganda has suggested that the regime's most fanatical elements will retreat to a mountain fortress in the Alps, a natural stronghold where they can resist for years, perhaps decades. The geography seems to support the threat. The peaks here rise over 3,000 metres. The valleys are narrow and easily defended. A small force with sufficient supplies could hold these passes indefinitely. In reality, the Alpine Redoubt is largely a fiction. The fortifications exist mostly on paper. The grand plans for a last stand have never been properly resourced or coordinated. But the American commanders advancing through Bavaria do not know this. They must assume the worst. They push forward cautiously, expecting ambush at every turn. And so, paradoxically, the lie of the Alpenfestung creates a kind of truth. The mountains are dangerous, not because of any organised fortress, but because they are full of men who have nothing left to lose. Waffen-SS units, cut off from central command, continue to fight on local initiative. They execute surrendering German soldiers as traitors. They hang Austrian civilians suspected of collaboration. They set up roadblocks and machine gun nests on mountain roads. They are wolves in the last winter of their existence, and they are biting at everything that moves. This is the landscape into which Jack Lee's reconnaissance unit has been ordered. The 12th Armoured Division, to which Lee belongs, has been pushing south from Nuremberg for the past 2 weeks. Their advance has been a strange mixture of fierce resistance and sudden collapse. One town surrenders without a shot. The next fights for 3 days. There is no pattern anymore, no front line in any meaningful sense. The war has fragmented into 1,000 separate conflicts, each governed by the temperament of whoever happens to command the local German garrison. Lee's unit, a scratch force built around 4 Sherman tanks and a few dozen infantrymen, represents the leading edge of this advance. They are reconnaissance troops, which means their job is to find the enemy before the main force does. It is dangerous work. They travel light, they move fast, they die more often than they would like. By the first week of May, they have reached the Inn Valley, the border region between Bavaria and the Austrian Tyrol. The scenery is spectacular. Alpine meadows, snow-capped peaks, villages that look like they belong in a fairy tale. But Lee is not looking at the scenery. He's looking for ambush positions, muzzle flashes, the telltale movement of men in field grey. The radio crackles. News of Hitler's death has spread through the American ranks, and with it, a cautious optimism. The war must end now. Surely the war must end now. But the Wehrmacht has not surrendered. The SS has not surrendered. And until someone signs something, Jack Lee's orders remain what they have always been. Advance, reconnoitre, engage. Somewhere behind him, in the rear areas that Lee's tanks have already passed through, the machinery of occupation is beginning to turn. Military government officers are cataloguing prisoners, intelligence units are hunting for war criminals, and in the confusion of collapsed authority, in the gaps between what was and what will be, all kinds of strange business is being transacted. One such piece of business involves a castle. Schloss Itter stands 12 kilometres south of Kufstein, perched on a wooded spur of rock that rises 250 metres above the valley floor. The castle is old. Parts of it date to the medieval period, though the structure has been rebuilt and modified many times over the centuries. Its walls are thick. Its position is commanding. It looks like what it once was, a stronghold built to control the road below. Since 1943, the castle has served a very different purpose. The SS has converted it into a special prison, not for ordinary prisoners of war, but for what the Reich terms Ehrenhäftlinge, honour prisoners. These are hostages of such importance that they must be held separately from the common mass of captives, in conditions that reflect their status while still keeping them utterly under German control. The prisoners at Schloss Itter are French. They represent the leadership of the nation that Germany defeated in 6 weeks in 1940, the nation whose occupation has been one of the war's most valuable prizes. Their captivity is both a humiliation and an insurance policy. As long as they remain in German hands, they cannot rally resistance or negotiate with the Allies. And if the war goes badly, if it comes to that, they can be used as bargaining chips, or simply eliminated. The roster of prisoners reads like a history of the French Third Republic in its final crisis. Édouard Daladier, Prime Minister of France from 1938 to 1940. It was Daladier who signed the Munich Agreement with Hitler, Mussolini and Chamberlain, trading Czechoslovak sovereignty for a peace that lasted 11 months. When war came anyway, Daladier led France into it. When France fell, he was arrested by the Vichy government, tried for war guilt, and eventually handed over to the Germans. He has been a prisoner since 1943. Paul Reynaud, Daladier's successor, the man who became Prime Minister in March 1940 and presided over the final catastrophic weeks of French resistance. It was Reynaud who appointed Charles de Gaulle to his cabinet. It was Reynaud who refused to sign an armistice and resigned rather than capitulate. His reward was 5 years of German imprisonment. General Maxime Weygand, Commander-in-Chief of the French Army in 1940, the man who told Reynaud that continued resistance was impossible, and that the army must have an armistice to preserve its honour. Weygand's advice helped end French resistance. The Germans imprisoned him anyway. General Maurice Gamelin, Weygand's predecessor, the general who presided over the French strategy that collapsed so spectacularly when the panzers came through the Ardennes. Gamelin's reputation died with his plans. His body has been in German hands ever since, and there are others. Marie-Agnès Caillot, the sister of Charles de Gaulle, arrested and held as leverage against the Free French leader who has caused the Reich such trouble. Michel Clemenceau, son of Georges Clemenceau, the tiger of France who led his nation to victory in the First World War. Jean Borotra, the tennis champion who once won Wimbledon and now paces the castle halls, a man whose athletic fame made him a propaganda target. These are not soldiers, they are not combatants, they are symbols of a defeated France, of a broken leadership, of a world that existed before the war and might, perhaps, exist again afterward. The SS guards them as treasures, not because they love them, but because they understand their value. For most of their captivity, the prisoners have been treated with a strange mixture of courtesy and menace. They have rooms, not cells. They take meals together. They are allowed to walk the castle grounds under supervision, but they are never permitted to forget that they are prisoners, that their lives depend on German whim, that the SS controls their fate absolutely. The commandant of Schloss Itter for most of the war has been a man named Sebastian Wimmer, an SS officer of the old school, brutal when necessary, correct when convenient. Wimmer understands his charge's importance. He keeps them alive and reasonably healthy, not out of kindness, but out of professional competence. The prisoners hate him, but they are alive to hate him. As the war enters its final phase, however, the East leadership has larger problems than one castle full of French politicians. The Reich is collapsing from both ends. The Soviets have taken Berlin. The Americans are pouring through Bavaria. Himmler himself is trying to negotiate a separate peace with the Western Allies, a desperate gamble that Hitler's death has made irrelevant. In this chaos, the status of Schloss Itter becomes unclear. No orders arrive, no instructions come. The Guards, mostly Waffen-SS troops recuperating from wounds suffered on the Eastern Front, grow restless. They know what is coming. Some want to fight to the end, others want to disappear into the mountains while there is still time. A few are simply waiting to see which way the wind blows. On May 4th, the wind blows out the door. Commandant Wimmer abandons Schloss Itter without warning. He simply leaves, takes his staff car and drives away, heading for parts unknown. Perhaps he hopes to escape justice. Perhaps he has orders from superiors who no longer have the authority to give them. Perhaps he has simply had enough. History does not record his reasons. It records only his absence. Behind him, he leaves a skeleton crew of guards and 14 French prisoners who have just become the most unprotected VIPs in Central Europe. The prisoners do not know what to do. For years, their survival has depended on following SS rules, on being valuable enough to keep alive. Now the rules have evaporated. The guards are confused. The roads outside are crawling with Waffen-SS units that might kill them for sport, with fleeing Wehrmacht troops that might use them as hostages, with Austrian resistance fighters whose intentions are uncertain. Edouard Daladier, the former Prime Minister, takes charge. He is 60 years old, a veteran of the First World War, and he has not lost the instinct for command. The situation, he tells the other prisoners, is extremely dangerous. The SS has not formally surrendered. The Americans may be days away. In the meantime, any one of a dozen roaming units might decide that killing France's former leadership would be a suitable capstone to the Reich's collapse. They must get word to the Americans. They must do it quickly. But how? The castle is surrounded by mountains. The nearest American lines are at least 20 kilometers away. The roads are controlled by German forces whose loyalties are uncertain. The prisoners have no weapons, no vehicles, no means of communication. They are, in every practical sense, trapped. There is, however, one man who might be able to help. Andreas Krobot is a Czech national who has spent the war working as a cook at Schloss Itter. He is not a prisoner. Technically, he is a civilian employee of the SS, a category that places him somewhere between servant and slave. He knows the castle, he knows the surrounding countryside, and he has a bicycle. Krobot volunteers to go for help. It is an act of remarkable courage. The roads are dangerous. If the SS catches him, he will be shot as a deserter or a collaborator, the exact charge depending on who does the catching. If he runs into a firefight between German units, he may simply be killed by stray fire. If he makes it to the Americans, he will have to convince them that his story is true, that a castle full of French VIPs is waiting for rescue in SS-controlled territory. It sounds like a trap. It sounds like the kind of story a desperate man might invent. But Krobot is willing to try. The prisoners give him what information they can. Names, locations, anything that might convince the Americans this is not a hoax. Then they watch him pedal away down the mountain road, a slight figure in civilian clothes disappearing around the first bend. It is the afternoon of May 4th, 1945. Krobot has perhaps 12 hours before the situation at Schloss Itter becomes untenable. He does not know where the Americans are. He does not know if they will believe him. He knows only that he must ride. The bicycle is old. The road is steep. Krobot pushes on. What he does not know, what no one in Schloss Itter knows, is that the first German soldier he will encounter is not SS. He is something much stranger, a Wehrmacht officer who has already decided to betray the Reich. Major Josef Gangl is 40 years old. He has been a professional soldier since the 1920s, when he joined the Austrian Bundesheer as a young man, and he has served the Greater German Reich since Austria's annexation in 1938. His war has taken him to Poland, France, and the Eastern Front. He has earned the Iron Cross. He has done things that will never be spoken of. He is, by every external measure, a loyal officer of the Wehrmacht. But Gangl is no longer loyal. He has not been loyal for some time. The Eastern Front broke something in Josef Gangl. The things he witnessed there, the systematic murder of civilians, the mass graves, the industrial scale of the killing, convinced him that he was fighting for a regime that had forfeited any claim to his allegiance. By 1944, he had begun making secret contact with the Austrian resistance, the scattered network of civilians and dissident soldiers who were waiting for the moment when the Reich could be resisted openly. That moment has now arrived. In the final days of April 1945, Gangl has taken command of a mixed unit of Wehrmacht soldiers and Austrian resistance fighters in the town of Wörgl, about 15 kilometers from Schloss Itter. His official orders are to defend the town against the American advance. His actual intention is to surrender it intact, sparing the civilians and his own men from a pointless last stand. It is a dangerous game. The Waffen-SS units in the area are still executing officers who show signs of defeatism. Gangl must maintain the appearance of loyalty while secretly negotiating the town's surrender. One wrong word, one suspicious report, and he will be hanged from a lamppost like the other traitors whose bodies have been appearing along the roadsides. Into this delicate situation, on the afternoon of May 4th, comes a Czech cook on a bicycle. Krobot's appearance at a German checkpoint outside Wörgl creates an immediate problem. He is a civilian. He has no papers authorizing him to travel. He's clearly agitated, and he's asking to speak to an officer about an urgent matter involving prisoners. The guards detain him. This is suspicious. This is exactly the kind of thing that might be a trap, an enemy intelligence operation, an attempt to locate German command posts for artillery or airstrikes. They bring him to their commanding officer. They bring him to Josef Gangl. Gangl listens to Krobot's story. A castle full of French VPs. The SS guards have fled. The prisoners are undefended. They need help immediately, before some roving SS unit decides to eliminate them as witnesses or bargaining chips. Gangl believes him. He believes him because the story is too strange to be a fabrication, too detailed, too specific. He believes him because he knows about Schloss Itter. Everyone in the region knows about the castle on the hill, the place where the SS keeps important foreigners. He believes him because rescuing French prisoners from the SS is exactly the kind of action that might help him when the Americans arrive, that might demonstrate he was on the right side all along. And he believes him because Josef Gangl, in the last hours of the war, has decided who he wants to be. He wants to be the kind of man who saves people. He wants to be the kind of man who refuses to commit one more atrocity in the service of a dying regime. He wants to survive the war with something like honor, even if that honor requires him to betray everything he has sworn to defend. Gangl tells Krobot that he will help, but he also tells him the truth. A handful of Wehrmacht soldiers and resistance fighters cannot hold Schloss Itter against a determined SS assault. They need heavier weapons. They need tanks. They need the Americans. Krobot says he will continue to Kufstein, where the Americans are said to be entering the town. Gangl gives him a safe conduct pass, a document that may or may not help depending on which Germans he encounters. Then he begins making his own preparations, gathering the men he trusts, the ones who will follow him into what may be the strangest mission of their war. Krobot mounts his bicycle once more. The road to Kufstein is still dangerous. The pass may not save him, but he has a promise now, a promise of help, and he rides toward the American lines with something like hope. The evening of May 4th settles over the Tyrolean Alps. In Schloss Itter, the French prisoners wait behind thick stone walls, listening for the sound of engines on the mountain road. In Wörgl, Major Gangl briefs his men on a rescue mission that will require them to fight alongside their enemies. And somewhere on the road between them, Andreas Krobot pumps his legs against the pedals, carrying a message that will bring together men who should, by every logic of the war they have been fighting, be trying to kill each other. The next 24 hours will determine whether they live or die. It will determine whether the war's final hours produce one more atrocity or one small act of redemption. It will determine whether the story of Castle Itter ends in massacre or in something much harder to explain. A moment when the categories of friend and enemy, German and American, captor and prisoner, briefly stop making sense, and a few dozen men must decide for themselves what side they are on. Jack Lee does not know any of this yet. He is still in Kufstein, still scanning rooftops, still waiting for orders that will make sense of the chaos around him. The war is ending, but it has not ended. The killing is slowing, but it has not stopped. Soon, a Czech cook on a bicycle will find him. Soon, everything will change. But for now, in the last light of May 4th, 1945, Lee does what he has been doing for 11 months. He watches. He waits. He keeps his crew ready for whatever comes next. Whatever comes next is a medieval castle, a German major, a handful of French politicians, and the strangest alliance of the Second World War. In the morning, the battle begins. But we are not yet at morning. We are still in the gathering dark, in the hours when decisions are being made that will echo for decades, when men who have been enemies for 6 years are discovering that the war has left them standing on the same side without anyone's permission. To understand what happens at Schloss Itter, we must understand the men who will fight there, their histories, their fears, their reasons for choosing what they choose. We must understand how an American lieutenant from Texas came to be leading tanks through the Austrian Alps. We must understand how a German major came to be offering his services to his nation's conquerors. We must understand how French prisoners came to be picking up rifles alongside soldiers from both armies, defending themselves in a battle that neither side had planned. These stories converge on a single point in space and time, a castle on a hill, a spring morning, a few hours of chaos that will outlast everyone who participated in them. But first, the night. First, the waiting. First, the long slow turning of the world from war towards something else. In Schloss Itter, the French prisoners have armed themselves with whatever they can find. The SS guards have left behind some weapons. Not many, but enough to make a token defence. Paul Renault, the former Prime Minister, has claimed a rifle. He has not fired a weapon since the First World War, but the mechanics come back to him. The hands remember what the mind has forgotten. General Weygand inspects the castle's defences with a professional eye. The walls are thick, but they were built for medieval warfare, not for automatic weapons and artillery. The gates are strong, but a tank could smash through them. The approaches are steep, which will slow any attacker, but there is no clear field of fire for defenders. It is not an ideal position. But it is the position they have. Daladier moves among the other prisoners, keeping up morale. He knows that leadership now means simply keeping people calm, keeping them busy, keeping them from imagining too vividly what the SS will do to them if they are retaken. The prisoners have lived through 5 years of captivity. They have survived interrogations, deprivations, the constant uncertainty of their fate. They will survive this night too, Daladier tells them. They must believe they will survive this night. Jean Barotra, the tennis champion, is restless. He is the youngest of the major prisoners, the most physically fit, and the waiting galls him. He wants to act. He wants to fight. He paces the halls of the castle like a caged animal, burning off energy that has nowhere to go. Marie-Agnès Caillot tends to the practical matters. Food must be prepared. Beds must be arranged for those who can sleep. The small details of survival must be attended to, even as the large questions, will they live, will they die, remain unanswered. She is Charles de Gaulle's sister, but she has her own courage, her own strength, and she does not flinch from what must be done. Outside the castle walls, the night is full of sounds. Engines in the distance, occasional gunfire, sporadic and meaningless, the soundtrack of a collapsing front, dogs barking in the valley below, the wind in the pines. The SS is out there somewhere. The prisoners know this. They cannot see them, but they can feel them. A presence in the darkness, a threat that has not yet materialized but surely will. The men who guarded them for 2 years did not simply disappear. They are regrouping, or fleeing, or waiting for orders. They are deciding what to do about the prisoners they left behind. In the morning, those decisions will become actions. In the morning, the guns will speak. But for now, the prisoners wait. They check their weapons, they watch the road. They listen to the night sounds and try not to think about what dawn will bring. Across the valley in Vogel, Josef Gangl is having a similar sleepless night. He has committed himself now. There is no going back. When he leads his men to Schloss Itter, he will be openly fighting against the SS, openly collaborating with the enemy. If the rescue fails, if the Americans do not come, if the SS catches him, there will be no trial. There will be a rope and a lamppost, and his body will hang as a warning to others who think of betraying the fatherland in its final hours. Gangl knows this. He accepts it. He has made his choice. But accepting death intellectually and facing it physically are different things. In the small hours of the morning, alone with his thoughts, Gangl allows himself to feel the fear he has been suppressing. He thinks of his wife. He thinks of his children. He thinks of the life he will not live if tomorrow goes wrong. Then he sets those thoughts aside. There is work to do. There are men to brief, plans to finalize, a route to Schloss Itter to scout. Fear is a luxury he cannot afford. And far to the north, rolling south through the darkness, Jack Lee's tanks are still moving. The reconnaissance unit has been ordered to push as far as possible before dawn to establish positions that the main force can consolidate in the morning. Lee's crew is exhausted, running on coffee and adrenaline, the dull, sustained alertness of men who have been at war too long. Lee does not know what morning will bring. He assumes it will bring more of what the past week has brought: confusion, sporadic resistance, the steady grinding advance through territory that is no longer defended in any coherent way. He has no idea that a Czech cook is riding toward him, with a story that will send him into combat one last time. The threads are converging. The men who will fight at Castle Itter are moving toward each other through the darkness, each carrying his own fears and hopes and reasons. They do not know they are part of the same story yet. They do not know that history is arranging them for a confrontation that will outlive them all. Morning will come soon, and with morning, the battle. But first, one more hour of darkness, one more hour of waiting, one more hour in which nothing has happened yet and everything is still possible. The Alpine night is cold, the stars are very bright, and somewhere on a mountain road, a bicycle wheel turns, carrying the message that will bring enemies together and create the strangest alliance of the Second World War. The first grey light finds Andreas Krobot still pedalling. He has been on the road for hours now, longer than he thought possible, his legs burning, his lungs roar from the mountain air. The bicycle beneath him is a heavy pre-war model, built for village errands, not desperate midnight rides through hostile territory. Every hill has been agony, every descent has been terror, the brakes unreliable, the darkness hiding ruts and stones that could send him sprawling. But he has not stopped. He cannot stop. Behind him, in the castle on the mountain, people are waiting for him to succeed. The valley floor opens before him as dawn approaches. Virgil lies ahead, a town that should be German-held, should be enemy territory, should be death for a Czech prisoner escaping an SS facility. But Krobot has heard rumours during his years at Schloss Itter, fragments of conversation between guards, whispered reports from Austrian servants who brought supplies. He knows that not all Germans are the same anymore. He knows that the war's end has fractured loyalties in ways that would have been unthinkable a year ago. He is gambling his life on those rumours being true. The first German soldiers he encounters are not SS. They are Wehrmacht, regular army, and they look as exhausted and confused as everyone else in this collapsing world. Krobot approaches them with his hands visible, speaking German, explaining that he has come from Schloss Itter with an urgent message. The soldiers do not shoot him. They do not arrest him. They look at each other with the uncertain expressions of men who no longer know what the rules are, and then they point him toward the town centre, toward the headquarters of a certain Major Gangl. Gangl is awake when Krobot arrives. He has been awake for hours, preparing for the day ahead, already committed to his own quiet rebellion against the dying Reich. When the Czech cook is brought before him, breathless and trembling from his ride, Gangl listens carefully to what he has to say. The French prisoners at Schloss Itter, the SS guards who abandoned them, the threat of SS units in the area who might return to eliminate the witnesses to years of captivity, the desperate need for protection. Gangl does not hesitate. He has been looking for a way to make his defection meaningful, to turn his private decision to stop following orders into something that might actually save lives. This is it. This is the opportunity he has been waiting for without knowing he was waiting for it. But Gangl is a realist. He commands a handful of men, some vehicles, limited ammunition. The SS units in the area outnumber him badly, and they are fanatical in a way his own troops are not. If he takes his small force to Schloss Itter, he might be able to hold the castle for a few hours, he might buy the prisoners time. But eventually, if the SS comes in strength, he will be overwhelmed. He needs help. He needs firepower. He needs the Americans. The nearest American forces are not far. The front has been moving so rapidly that it is hardly a front anymore, just a ragged line of advancing units pushing into territory that the Germans are abandoning faster than it can be occupied. Gangl knows approximately where the Americans are. He knows that approaching them will be dangerous, that he will be approaching enemy soldiers who have every reason to shoot first and ask questions later. But he also knows that it is the only chance. He sends Krobot to rest. The cook has done his part, more than his part, and the bicycle ride through the night has left him barely able to stand. Then Gangl gathers a few of his most trusted men and prepares a white flag. They will go to meet the Americans. They will try to explain the situation. They will ask former enemies to trust them, to follow them into a fight that has nothing to do with the war they have been waging for 6 years and everything to do with the people caught in between. The drive toward American lines takes Gangl through a landscape that no longer makes sense. German units are surrendering in some places, still fighting in others. Austrian civilians are beginning to emerge from their houses, uncertain whether to celebrate or hide. SS execution squads are still operating, hanging deserters from lampposts and bridge railings, their bodies left as warnings to anyone who might think the war is over before the Führer says it is over. The Führer is dead, has been dead for days, but the killing continues anyway, driven by momentum and madness, and the desperate fury of true believers who cannot accept that everything they fought for has come to nothing. Gangl keeps his white flag clearly visible. He moves slowly, deliberately, giving American scouts time to see that he is not attacking, that he comes in peace. His heart is pounding. Every instinct developed over 6 years of war tells him that what he is doing is insane, that he is driving directly into enemy guns, that the Americans will cut him down before he can explain himself. But he keeps going. There is no other option. The American patrol that intercepts him is cautious but not hostile. The war has been strange in these final days, full of surrenders and defections and German officers who suddenly want to talk instead of fight. Gangl is not the first to approach under a white flag. The Americans take him into custody, disarm his men, and bring him to their commanding officer. First Lieutenant John C. Lee of the 12th Armored Division's 23rd Tank Battalion is a Texan, 28 years old, with the quiet confidence of a man who has led soldiers through France and into Germany and survived things that should have killed him. He has been in combat for months. He has lost men. He has killed men. He is tired in a way that goes beyond physical exhaustion, tired of the war, tired of the dying, ready for it to be over. When Gangl is brought before him, Lee does not see an enemy. He sees another tired soldier, another man who has been through too much, another human being who wants the killing to stop. Gangl explains the situation in careful English. The French prisoners at Schloss Itter, the SS threat, the need for immediate action. He describes the castle, its location, its defences. He estimates the strength of the SS units in the area. He explains that he and his men are prepared to fight alongside the Americans, to guide them to the castle, to help defend the prisoners until reinforcements can arrive. Lee listens. He asks questions. He studies the map that Gangl has brought, traces the mountain roads with his finger, calculates distances and times. He's not authorized to mount this kind of operation. His orders are to continue the reconnaissance, to probe enemy positions, to support the main advance. Diverting his unit to rescue a castle full of French VEPs is not part of the plan. But Jack Lee has been at war long enough to know when the plan no longer matters. The Reich is collapsing. The orders that made sense a week ago are already obsolete. And here is an opportunity to save lives, to do something unambiguously good in the moral confusion of the war's final days. He does not need permission. He needs tanks. Lee agrees to help. The decision is made quickly, almost casually, in the way that life or death decisions are often made by men who have been making them for too long. Lee will take his Sherman tank, besotten Jenny, along with whatever other vehicles and men he can gather on short notice. Gangl will guide them to Schloss Itter. They will secure the castle, protect the prisoners, and hold until the main American force can consolidate the area. It is a simple plan. Simple plans work best when everything else is chaos. Gathering the rescue force takes time they do not have. Lee pulls together a scratch team, his own tank crew, a handful of infantry, a few soldiers from other units who happen to be available. The force is absurdly small for the mission they are about to attempt. Against a determined SS assault, a single Sherman and a dozen men would be overwhelmed in minutes. But Lee is betting that the SS will not assault in strength, that the confusion of the war's end will work in their favour, that they can hold long enough for help to arrive. Gangl brings his own contribution, a handful of Wehrmacht soldiers who have followed him into defection, plus a captured German truck that can carry additional men. It is not much, it is what they have. The combined force that sets out for Schloss Itter numbers fewer than 20 men, with one tank, in territory where hundreds of Waffen-SS troops are still operational and still looking for enemies to kill. The drive to the castle takes them through country that is both beautiful and terrible. The Austrian Alps rise around them, snow-capped peaks glowing in the morning light, pine forests dark on the lower slopes. It is the kind of landscape that postcards are made of, the kind of scenery that tourists will come to admire in peacetime. But the road is littered with the debris of a collapsing army. Abandoned vehicles, discarded equipment, bodies that no one has bothered to bury. Once they pass a group of German soldiers hanging from trees, executed by SS squads for the crime of trying to surrender. Lee's men look at the bodies and say nothing. There is nothing to say. Gangl guides them along back roads, avoiding the main routes where SS units are most likely to be operating. He knows this territory. He has been stationed in the area for months, preparing for a final stand that he never intended to make. Now that local knowledge is being used to undermine the cause he was supposed to defend, the irony is not lost on him. They reach Schloss Itter in the mid-morning. The castle rises above them on its rocky promontory, looking exactly like what it is, a medieval fortress built to withstand siege, positioned to dominate the valley below. For the past 2 years, it has been a prison. Now it is about to become a battlefield. The prisoners are waiting for them. They have spent the night in sleepless tension, watching the road, listening for the sound of engines that might mean rescue or might mean death. When Lee's Sherman rumbles into view, flying the American flag, the relief is overwhelming. Paul Reynaud, former Prime Minister of France, comes out to greet them personally, shaking hands, thanking the Americans in elegant English, behaving as if he's receiving diplomatic visitors rather than combat soldiers who have just driven through enemy territory to save his life. Lee takes in the situation with a professional eye. The castle is defensible, more or less. The walls are thick stone, built to stop arrows and cannonballs, more than adequate against small arms fire. The main gate is solid. The positions around the perimeter offer decent fields of fire, but the approaches from the village below are problematic, with too many angles of attack and too many places where enemy troops could mass for an assault. The single tank positioned in the courtyard can provide covering fire, but it cannot be everywhere at once, and if the SS brings up heavy weapons, artillery or tanks of their own, the castle walls that seem so solid will become a trap rather than a sanctuary. There is no time for elaborate defensive preparations. Lee posts his men at key positions around the perimeter. Gangl's Wehrmacht soldiers take up positions alongside them, the two groups working together with the strange ease of professionals who understand their trade regardless of the uniforms they wear. The French prisoners are organised into a reserve force, armed with whatever weapons are available, rifles from the SS armoury, pistols, a few grenades. Reynaud and Daladier, the two former prime ministers who once led France and then led it into catastrophe, are suddenly soldiers again, ready to fight for their lives. Jean Borotra, the tennis champion, volunteers for a mission that everyone knows is suicidal. If the SS attacks in force, the defenders will need reinforcements. Someone must break out of the castle, reach American lines, and bring back help. Borotra, at 50 years old, believes he can do it. He is a world-class athlete still in remarkable physical condition despite the years of captivity. He knows the mountains around the castle. He is willing to try. Lee agrees to let him go if the situation becomes desperate. It is not much of a plan. It is better than no plan at all. The morning wears on. The defenders wait. They watch the road below, the forest edges, the approaches from the village of Itter. They know the SS is out there. They know an attack is coming. They do not know when, or in what strength, or whether they will survive it. All they can do is wait, and watch, and prepare for whatever is about to happen. Josef Gangl moves among the defenders, checking positions, offering advice, translating between the Americans and his own men. He is calm, professional, apparently untroubled by the situation. Inside, he is acutely aware that he is standing on the wrong side of a line he crossed in the darkness, that every moment brings him closer to a reckoning that may end with his death. But he shows none of this. He is an officer. His men are watching. The Americans are watching. The French prisoners whose lives depend on this makeshift alliance are watching. He must project confidence even if he does not feel it. Lee is everywhere, organising, directing, making decisions with the quiet authority of a man who has been trained for exactly this kind of chaos. His tank crew runs through their drills, checking ammunition, testing the main gun, preparing for a fight they all hope will not come but know probably will. The Sherman is their main advantage, the one asset that might make the difference between survival and annihilation. If it goes down, if it is disabled or destroyed, the defence becomes hopeless. Around midday, the first SS scouts appear. They are visible at the edge of the forest, watching the castle, counting defenders, assessing the strength of the opposition. The defenders watch them back through binoculars and rifle scopes. No shots are fired. This is reconnaissance, both sides gathering information, preparing for what comes next. The scouts withdraw. An hour passes, then 2. The waiting is terrible, worse in some ways than combat itself. Combat is adrenaline and action. No time to think, no time to be afraid. Waiting is imagination running wild, cataloguing all the ways things could go wrong, all the ways they could die in this castle on a mountain in the final days of a war that is already over everywhere except here. In the middle of the afternoon, the attack begins. It starts with mortar fire, shells arcing over the castle walls and exploding in the courtyard. The defenders scatter, taking cover, pressing themselves against the ancient stones. The Sherman buttoned up, hatches closed, crew inside and ready. Lee's men return fire at targets they cannot clearly see, muzzle flashes in the forest, shapes moving through the trees. The SS is probing, testing, looking for weak points in the defence. The first assault comes from the village below, a company-strength force advancing up the road toward the main gate. They move with professional discipline, using cover, laying down, suppressing fire, exactly the kind of attack that well-trained infantry has been making for 6 years of war. The defenders respond with everything they have. Rifle fire from the walls, machine gun bursts from prepared positions, and then the thunderous voice of the Sherman's main gun. A 75mm shell exploding among the attackers and sending bodies flying. The assault falters. The SS troops pull back, dragging their wounded, leaving their dead. A moment of quiet follows, broken only by the moans of injured men and the ringing in the defenders' ears. Then the mortars open up again, and the cycle continues. The battle falls into a rhythm. Attack, defence, withdrawal. Attack, defence, withdrawal. The SS probes different approaches, looks for weaknesses, tests the defenders' resolve. The defenders hold, barely, losing men they cannot afford to lose, expending ammunition they cannot replace. The castle walls are pocked with bullet holes. The courtyard is cratered by mortar impacts. Smoke rises from burning vehicles and smouldering debris. In the midst of the fighting, Jean Barotra makes his break. The former tennis champion slips out through a secondary gate, moving fast, staying low, using the chaos of the battle as cover. He disappears into the forest. The defenders do not know if he will make it. They do not know if help is coming. All they know is that they must hold, must keep fighting, must survive until something changes. Joseph Gangel is at the main gate when the sniper finds him. He's helping to coordinate the defence, directing fire, exposing himself to do his job, the way officers have always exposed themselves in combat. The bullet takes him in the head. He goes down instantly, already dead before he hits the ground, his body crumpling beside the French prisoner he was trying to protect. The defenders see him fall, the Americans and the Germans who followed him into this strange alliance, the French prisoners who owe him their lives. There is no time to mourn, no time to process what has happened. The battle continues. The SS is still attacking. The living must keep fighting or join the dead. But something has shifted. Gangel's death crystallizes something for the defenders, makes the stakes personal in a way that abstract concepts like duty and honor cannot. This German officer chose to betray everything he had served for 6 years, chose to fight alongside his enemies, chose to die protecting people who should have been his prisoners. His sacrifice demands that they match it, that they hold the castle, that they make his death mean something. The afternoon wears on. The attacks continue. The defenders grow fewer. Their ammunition dwindles. Their situation becomes increasingly desperate. But they do not break. They do not surrender. They hold. And somewhere in the forest, running toward American lines, Jean Barotra is still moving. The afternoon light slants through the smoke, casting long shadows across the courtyard where Gangel's body lies. The defenders cannot move him, cannot even cover his face with a jacket or a coat. Every hand is needed on the walls. Every rifle is firing. The dead must wait for the living to finish their work. Lee finds himself thinking about the moment he shook Gangel's hand just hours ago in a different world. The German officer had stood before him in Kufstein, exhausted, desperate, asking American soldiers to trust him with their lives, and Lee had said yes. He had looked at an enemy officer, a man who had spent years fighting for a regime that had murdered millions, and he had chosen to believe that people could change, that the last act of a man's life could redeem everything that came before. Now, Gangle is dead, and Lee is alive, and the castle is still under attack, and the only thing Lee can do to honour that trust is to keep fighting. The Sherman has become the linchpin of the defence. Every time the SS masses for another assault, the tank's 75mm gun speaks, and the assault breaks apart. The gun is loud enough to rattle teeth, loud enough to make conversation impossible for minutes afterward, loud enough that the crew inside the buttoned-up turret can barely hear each other's shouted commands. But it works. The SS troops have no equivalent firepower. Their mortars can damage the walls, can wound and kill individual defenders, but they cannot match the concentrated violence of a tank shell landing in the middle of an infantry formation. The problem is ammunition. The Sherman carries 47 rounds of main gun ammunition when fully loaded. Lee's tank has been in combat for weeks. It is nowhere near fully loaded. Every shot that breaks an assault is a shot that cannot be replaced, a finite resource being spent to buy time that may be worthless if no reinforcement comes. Lee makes the calculations that commanders always make in desperate situations. How many rounds remaining? How many attacks they can expect to break before the gun falls silent? How long until dark? Whether darkness will help them or doom them. The SS knows this ground better than they do. If the fighting continues into the night, attackers with knowledge of every path, every approach, every dead ground and covered avenue will have the advantage over defenders who cannot see what is coming until it arrives. The prisoners have armed themselves now. Paul Reynaud, former Prime Minister of France, stands at a window with a rifle that one of the German soldiers pressed into his hands. His formal politician's posture seems absurd in this context. A man who once addressed the French nation in times of crisis now crouching behind medieval stone, with a weapon he probably hasn't fired since his military service decades ago. But he holds his position. He does not flee. Whatever failures of leadership brought France to its knees in 1940, whatever compromises and miscalculations marked his political career, in this moment Reynaud is simply another defender, one more rifle pointed at the enemy. General Viand is somewhere deeper in the castle, organising the non-combatants, keeping the women and the older prisoners away from the windows and the walls. His military experience, however tarnished by the events of 1940, still has value here. He understands how to organise people in crisis, how to create order from chaos, how to keep frightened civilians from getting in the way of the soldiers who need to fight. It is a strange redemption for a man whose strategic failures contributed to the fall of France. Here, in this Austrian castle, he is doing what he can with what he has. Marie-Agnès de Gaulle moves among the wounded with bandages and water. There are no medical supplies worth mentioning. The defenders have morphine syrettes from their individual first aid kits, have field dressings that were designed for temporary treatment before proper evacuation, have nothing that can address serious wounds inflicted by high-velocity rifle fire or mortar shrapnel. What they can offer the wounded is presence, is the knowledge that someone sees them, that someone cares, that they have not been abandoned to die alone. Marie-Agnès offers this. Her hands shake, her voice trembles, but she keeps moving, keeps working, keeps doing the only thing she can do while the battle rages outside. The SS launches another assault, this one from a different angle, probing the eastern wall where the defences seem thinner. Lee repositions men he cannot spare, weakening one position to shore up another, playing a shell game with defenders who are already spread too thin. The mathematics of the situation are brutal. He has perhaps 30 effective defenders, including the German soldiers who followed Gangle and the prisoners who have picked up weapons. The SS has over 100, possibly 150, with more potentially available if units in the surrounding area decide to join the fight. Numbers matter in combat. Training and equipment can offset numerical disadvantage, but there are limits. The defenders are approaching those limits. The afternoon light begins to fade, the shadows lengthen, the attacks continue, but they have lost some of their initial ferocity. The SS has taken casualties, serious casualties, and even fanatical troops have limits to what they will accept. The mortar fire continues, steady and punishing, but the infantry assaults become less frequent, less determined. The defenders begin to hope that they might survive until nightfall. Private First Class William Rushford takes a bullet through the shoulder during one of these later attacks. He goes down hard, cursing, his rifle clattering against the stone. The man beside him, a German corporal whose name Rushford never learned, drags him back from the wall, applies a field dressing with hands that know this work too well, props him up against a column in the courtyard. Rushford's arm is useless now, the shoulder joint shattered, the wound already soaking through the bandage. But he is alive. With his good hand he draws his sidearm. He cannot aim a rifle one-handed, but he can fire a pistol if the enemy gets close enough. He stays in the fight. This is what the defence of Castle Itter looks like as the afternoon wears into evening. Wounded men who refuse to stop fighting, officers dead, and leadership passing to whoever is still standing. Ammunition counted in individual rounds rather than cases or crates. Every defender knows that relief may not come, that Borotra may not make it through, that they may be holding a position for no purpose at all. They hold anyway. There is nothing else to do. The Sherman's ammunition situation becomes critical. The crew reports to Lee in terse fragments, numbers that tell a story of impending silence. 7 rounds of high explosive, 3 of armour-piercing that would be useless against infantry anyway, 10 rounds total to break whatever attacks the SS still has in them. Lee orders the gunner to hold fire unless absolutely necessary, to let the smaller weapons handle what they can, to save the tank's killing power for the moments when nothing else will work. The crew understands. They have been in combat long enough to know what rationing ammunition means, what it says about their chances. The German soldiers who came with Gangle fight with a desperate intensity that the Americans recognise and respect. These men have chosen treason, have chosen to fight and die alongside enemies they spent years trying to kill. There is no going back for them. If the SS takes the castle, they will be executed as traitors, and the execution will not be quick or kind. The SS has refined the art of making examples out of deserters, has left bodies hanging from lampposts and trees across the Reich as warnings to others who might consider laying down their arms. The Germans defending Castle Itter fight with the knowledge that capture is worse than death. One of these Germans, a sergeant named Kurt, finds himself fighting beside an American private named Patterson. They do not share a language. Communication happens in gestures, in pointed fingers, in the universal vocabulary of combat. Cover me, watch that direction, incoming, down. They have been enemies for years. They have never met before today. By the standards of this war, they should be trying to kill each other. Instead, they are learning how to keep each other alive. Kurt takes a mortar fragment in the thigh as evening approaches, a piece of jagged metal that embeds itself deep in the muscle. He keeps fighting, limping, bleeding through an improvised bandage, refusing to abandon his position on the wall. Patterson shares his last morphine surette with the German, watches as Kurt's face relaxes slightly as the drug takes effect, then helps him reload his rifle. The absurdity of the situation would be funny if anyone had the energy to laugh. 2 soldiers from opposite sides of history's greatest conflict, sharing drugs and ammunition, dying together for a cause that neither of them could have imagined when this war began. The attacks taper off as true darkness falls. The SS has not given up. The defenders can see fires in the village below, can hear movement in the forest, can sense the enemy reorganising, preparing for the next phase. But for now, for this moment, the shooting stops. The silence is almost worse than the noise. In the silence, the defenders can hear the wounded moaning, can hear the wind whistling through holes in the walls that were not there this morning, can hear their own ragged breathing, their own pounding hearts, the sounds of bodies pushed past exhaustion, continuing to function on adrenaline and fear. Lee takes stock of his command. 3 dead, including Gangle, at least 8 wounded, some critically. Ammunition at desperate levels for every weapon except the tank, and the tank is nearly out too. Food and water adequate for whatever that is worth. The French prisoners are frightened but intact, huddled in the safest parts of the castle, waiting for a deliverance that may never come. The Germans who followed Gangle are exhausted but still fighting, their commitment unshaken by their commander's death. The Americans are holding together, professional soldiers doing their job, but Lee can see the strain in their faces, can hear the doubt in their voices. How long can they hold? What happens when the ammunition runs out? Where is Borotra? Where is help? The night passes in fragments of consciousness. The defenders take turns resting, 2 hours on, 2 hours off, though no one truly sleeps. The SS maintains its mortar fire throughout the night, sporadic harassment designed to prevent rest, to keep the defenders on edge, to wear them down for the assault that everyone knows is coming at dawn. Shells land in the courtyard, on the walls, once on the roof of the keep itself. No one is killed in these night bombardments, but no one rests either. The defenders crouch in whatever shelter they can find, flinching at each explosion, waiting for the one that lands close enough to matter. Lieutenant Lee spends part of the night with the wounded. Private Rushford is running a fever now, the shoulder wound already showing signs of infection. There is nothing anyone can do about this. They have no antibiotics, no surgical capability, no way to evacuate the wounded to proper medical care. Rushford may die of this wound even if they hold the castle, even if help comes, simply because the infection will progress faster than any rescue can arrive. Lee does not say this. He sits with Rushford for a while, talks about nothing in particular, maintains the fiction that everything will be fine. This is what officers do for their men. This is the least of what they owe. The German wounded receive the same care, such as it is. Whatever national hatreds exist in the abstract, here in the dark of Castle Itter, there are only defenders. The Americans share their medical supplies with the Germans, apply the same bandages, administer the same morphine. The French prisoners do what they can to help. Boundaries dissolve in the shared experience of survival. Somewhere in the darkness, beyond the castle walls, the SS is preparing. The defenders cannot see the preparations, cannot know the details, but they can imagine. Fresh troops being brought up, ammunition being distributed, officers planning the final assault that will overwhelm the exhausted defenders and seize the castle. The SS has taken heavy casualties, but they have reserves. The defenders have nothing but what they carried with them. As the first grey light of dawn begins to define the eastern horizon, the defenders prepare for what they believe will be their last stand. They check their weapons, count their remaining ammunition, take positions on the walls. No one speaks of surrender. No one speaks of escape. There is nowhere to escape to, and surrender to the SS means death. The only choice is to fight, to make the enemy pay for every inch of ground, to hold as long as humanly possible and then hold a little longer. Paul Renault appears on the wall beside an American sergeant, his rifle ready. The former Prime Minister's hands are steady now. Whatever transformation has occurred in this old politician overnight, he has found something in himself that was not visible before. Perhaps it is the proximity of death. Perhaps it is the example set by Gangle, by the American soldiers, by all these men who chose to risk everything for strangers. Perhaps it's simply the recognition that in the end, when everything else is stripped away, a man has only his choices, and these are the choices that define him. General Weygand joins them, though he is too old for this work, too frail to be useful in close combat. He takes a position with a rifle nonetheless. His presence matters more than his military contribution. If the former commander-in-chief of the French army is willing to stand on the walls, then no one else can justify hiding. The women and children are sequestered in the deepest part of the castle, as far from the fighting as possible. Marie-Agnès de Gaulle remains with them, ready to provide what comfort she can if the final assault succeeds, and the SS comes for the prisoners. Everyone knows what that will mean. The SS has not travelled this far, has not taken these casualties, to accept the surrender of enemies they have been ordered to execute. If the walls fall, the killing will be indiscriminate. Lee positions his remaining men for the final defence. The tank is nearly silent now, its ammunition too precious to use except at the moment of crisis. The riflemen on the walls are down to their last magazines. The machine guns have perhaps a belt apiece. It is not enough. It was never going to be enough. And then, as the sun clears the mountains to the east, as the defenders brace for the assault that will surely come, a different sound reaches them. Not mortar fire, not rifle shots, not the shouts of attacking infantry. This sound is distant but growing louder, a mechanical roar that the Americans recognize instantly. Engines, many engines, heavy vehicles approaching fast. The sound could be SS reinforcements arriving to finish the job. It could be the doom that the defenders have been expecting since the battle began. But something about the pitch of those engines, something about the rhythm and the volume, makes Lee pause. He has heard this sound before. He has lived with this sound for months, through France, through Germany, through the long campaign that brought him to this Austrian valley. Those are American engines. That is the sound of a relief column. That is the sound of survival. The defenders do not cheer. They are too exhausted, too battered, too numbed by the night and the battle and the losses to produce anything as simple as celebration. But they straighten slightly. They look toward the sound. They begin to believe that they might actually live through this. In the forest below, the SS hears the same engines. They too understand what this means. Their window for taking the castle is closing. Whatever forces are approaching, they will change the equation decisively. The SS command must make a choice: launch an immediate assault and accept catastrophic casualties trying to breach the walls before reinforcement arrives, or withdraw and preserve their forces for the continuing guerrilla war that true believers insist will keep the Reich alive. They choose withdrawal, the fanaticism that drove them to attack this castle, to spend their lives trying to kill prisoners who pose no military threat. That fanaticism has limits when confronted with the practical reality of armoured reinforcements. The SS begins to melt away into the forest, dispersing into small groups, abandoning the siege that consumed so many of their number. The defenders watch them go. From the walls, the Americans and Germans see enemy soldiers slipping away through the trees, heading for the mountains, disappearing into the chaos that has consumed what remains of the Third Reich. There is no pursuit. The defenders have no strength for pursuit, no capacity to do anything except stand on their walls and watch their enemies retreat. The relief column enters the valley minutes later. American tanks and half-tracks, a full company-strength force that could have broken any attack the SS might have mounted. The sight of those vehicles, the white stars on their hulls, the American soldiers riding on the armour, this is what salvation looks like after a night that seemed certain to end in death. The tanks approach the castle, the soldiers dismount. They find a scene that defies easy description. American and German soldiers fighting together, French politicians and generals holding rifles on medieval walls, a Sherman tank nearly out of ammunition, dead defenders including a German officer who died protecting French prisoners. The relief force has seen many strange things in this war, but nothing quite like this. First Lieutenant John Lee walks out to meet them. He's still wearing the uniform he put on in Kufstein, now torn, bloody, stained with the debris of battle. His face is grey with exhaustion, his hands shake slightly, the tremor that comes after sustained combat, when the adrenaline fades and the body remembers how afraid it has been. But he is alive, his men are alive, the prisoners are alive. The castle stands. He reports to the ranking officer of the relief force, gives the essential facts in the clipped language of military communication. The officer listens, asks clarifying questions, begins to understand the extraordinary situation he is driven into. This is not a normal battlefield. This is not a normal victory. This is something that will require explanation far above both their pay grades. The morning of May 5th, 1945 settles over Castle Itter with a strange, almost unbearable stillness. The guns have stopped. The forest that rang with rifle fire and the crack of the 88mm rounds now holds only birdsong and the distant rumble of American armour moving through the valley. Smoke still rises from the burned-out hulk of the besotten Jenny, the Sherman tank that held the courtyard through the worst of the fighting, now a blackened monument to the night that has passed. Spent brass casings litter the flagstones. The walls bear fresh scars from bullets and shrapnel, and somewhere in the castle, covered now with a blanket or a coat, lies the body of Major Joseph Gangl, the German officer who chose this strange final mission and paid for it with his life. The relief column spreads out around the castle perimeter, establishing the security that the defenders could not provide for themselves. American soldiers move through the grounds with the practiced efficiency of men who have done this 100 times before, clearing buildings, checking corners, confirming that the SS withdrawal is genuine and complete. They find evidence everywhere of what the night cost. Blood trails, abandoned equipment, the detritus of combat that tells its own story of violence and desperation. In the forest below they discover SS dead, men who fell to the castle's defensive fire and were left behind when their comrades retreated. The count will take time to complete, but the preliminary numbers suggest that the defenders inflicted casualties far beyond what their small force should have been capable of delivering. Inside the castle, the French prisoners are experiencing something that many of them have not felt in years, the knowledge that they are genuinely free. For Paul Reynaud, the former Prime Minister who held a rifle on these walls and fought alongside American enlisted men, the morning brings a complex mixture of emotions that he will spend years trying to articulate. He was a prisoner when the sun set yesterday. He's a free man now, liberated not by a formal military operation, but by this improvised alliance of enemies who became brothers for a single night. The journey from his cell to this moment has taken him through experiences that seemed impossible even as he lived them, loading magazines, watching bullets strike the walls around him, hearing the crash of artillery that might have killed everyone in the castle. He has survived, France has survived. The war that destroyed so much is ending at last. Edouard Daladier moves through the castle with the heavy tread of a man carrying invisible burdens. He signed the Munich Agreement. He led France into a war it was not prepared to fight. He watched his country fall and spent years as a prisoner, knowing that history would judge him harshly for the decisions he made in the years before the catastrophe. But this morning, standing in the courtyard of a medieval Austrian castle, surrounded by the evidence of a battle he helped win, Daladier allows himself a moment of something that is not quite redemption, but is perhaps its distant cousin. He fought. When the moment came, when the SS attacked and the walls needed defending, he did not hide or cower or rely on others to protect him. He stood with the Americans and the Germans who had become their allies, and he fought. Whatever history decides about Munich, about the fall of France, about the decisions that led to this war, this morning Edouard Daladier knows that he fought. General Maxime Weygand, at 78 the oldest of the prisoners, sits in a chair someone has provided, his body acknowledging at last the exhaustion that the night's adrenaline kept at bay. He commanded armies. He watched France fall. He spent years in German captivity, transferred from one location to another, uncertain whether he would ever see his homeland again. The battle that just ended was not his kind of warfare. It was improvised, desperate, fought with whatever weapons came to hand by a mixed force that violated every principle of military organization. But it worked. The improvisation held. The castle stands. Weygand has seen many battles in his long military career, but he suspects that this strange engagement in the Tyrolean Alps will stay with him in ways that larger, more conventional operations never did. There is something pure about fighting for survival, with enemies who have become allies, something that cuts through the political and strategic complexities that defined his career and reduces war to its essential human elements. General Maurice Gamelin, who bore so much blame for France's defeat in 1940, stands at a window and watches the American tanks patrol the perimeter. He was the commander who failed to anticipate the German attack through the Ardennes, whose slow responses allowed the Wehrmacht to achieve the encirclement that broke the French army. He has had years to contemplate that failure, years in German custody to replay the decisions he made and wonder what he might have done differently. This morning none of that seems to matter quite as much as it did yesterday. He is alive. He is free. The war that began with his defeat is ending with his liberation, and whatever judgments await him in France, they will be the judgments of living history rather than the silence of a forgotten prisoner executed in the war's final chaos. Jean Barotra, the tennis champion, the man who scaled the castle walls in the darkness to seek help, sits with his back against sun-warmed stone and allows himself to feel the tension drain from his muscles. His athletic training served him well in ways he never anticipated when he learned to move across a tennis court. The physical skills that made him a champion, the agility, the conditioning, the ability to perform under pressure, these same skills carried him over the castle walls and through enemy territory in the darkness. He does not know yet whether his desperate mission contributed to the relief column's arrival, whether the message he carried made any difference to the outcome, but he knows that he did everything a man could do. He ran toward danger when staying meant certain capture or death. He used the body that tennis shaped to serve a cause larger than any trophy or championship. Whatever comes next, Jean Barotra knows that he met the moment when the moment came. First Lieutenant John Lee does not sit. He cannot sit, not yet, not while there are duties still to perform and reports still to make. He moves through the castle grounds with the relief force officers, explaining the defensive positions, showing them where each element of his small force held their ground. He points to the gatehouse where his men fought their desperate holding action. He shows them the walls where the French prisoners manned their stations. He stands beside the burned Sherman and describes how his crew kept fighting even as their vehicle took hits, kept the main gun in action until ammunition ran out, transformed themselves from tankers to infantry when their tank could no longer serve its designed purpose. The relief force officers listen with the particular attention of men who recognize they are hearing something extraordinary. They have liberated concentration camps. They have seen the horrors that this war produced. But they have not seen anything quite like this. Americans and Germans fighting side by side, politicians and generals serving as riflemen, a medieval castle held against a force that should have overwhelmed it. The practical matters of the aftermath begin to assert themselves. The prisoners need medical attention, not for combat wounds, most escaped injury, but for the effects of years of captivity, malnutrition, stress, the accumulated damage that imprisonment inflicts on human bodies. The castle itself needs to be secured and documented, its role in the German prisoner system recorded for whatever tribunals and investigations will follow the war's end. The American dead. There are remarkably few, a testament to the defensive advantages the castle provided, need to be prepared for transport and burial with proper military honours. The German dead, those who fought alongside the Americans, present a more complicated question. They were technically enemy soldiers until hours ago. Now they are something else, allies of a sort, men who died fighting against the regime they once served. And then there is Major Joseph Gangl. His body lies where he fell, or nearly so, moved only enough to confirm that life had departed. The circumstances of his death are already being discussed among the survivors, the story taking shape that will eventually become history. He died shielding Paul Reynaud from sniper fire. He saw the threat, understood what was about to happen, and placed his own body between the bullet and the French politician. The former Prime Minister of France lives because a German major, a man who wore the uniform of the Wehrmacht, who served the regime that conquered France, who spent years as an officer in Hitler's army, chose to sacrifice himself for a French prisoner he had known for less than 48 hours. This is not supposed to happen. The narratives of war, the stories that soldiers tell themselves to make sense of what they do and what they see, do not easily accommodate a German officer dying to save a French politician. The categories are wrong, the allegiances are scrambled. But Joseph Gangl lies dead in Castle Itter, and Paul Reynaud breathes the morning air, and the fact of what happened cannot be altered to fit more comfortable stories. Major Gangl made his choices. He chose to resist, to aid the Austrian underground, to approach the Americans with a plan that should have gotten him shot. He chose to lead German soldiers into battle against other German soldiers, to fire on men who wore the same uniform he wore, to break every oath he swore when he became an officer, and in the end he chose to die protecting a man who represented everything that German propaganda told him to hate. His final act was an act of protection, an affirmation that human life mattered more than ideology, that the French politician bleeding on the floor was a man worth saving regardless of nationality or politics, or the bitter history between their countries. The survivors will carry this with them. Paul Reynaud, who watched Gangl fall, who understood in that moment that a German officer had just died for him, this will shape how Reynaud thinks about the war, about Germany, about the possibility of reconciliation between former enemies. The American soldiers who fought beside Gangl, who saw his courage and his competence and his ultimate sacrifice, they will tell stories about this German major for the rest of their lives. Whatever they thought about Germans before Castle Itter, whatever hatreds or suspicions the war planted in them, they saw something at this castle that complicates those feelings. They saw a German officer become their brother in arms and die, proving that the uniform matters less than the choices a man makes. The relief force begins organising transport. The French prisoners will be evacuated to American-controlled territory, the beginning of their journey back to France and the complicated receptions that await them. Some will be celebrated as resistance heroes. Others will face questions about their conduct before and during their captivity. The political lives they led before the war, the decisions they made, the roles they played in France's defeat, none of this has been erased by their imprisonment or their participation in the castle's defence. They are returning to a France that has suffered, that has been occupied, that has experienced collaboration and resistance and everything in between. The liberation they are experiencing today is personal. The liberation their country experienced months ago when Allied forces drove out the Germans is something they will need to learn about second-hand, a history they did not witness because they were locked in German prisons. First Lieutenant Lee watches the evacuation preparations with the detached efficiency of a man running on empty reserves. He has not slept in over 30 hours. He has commanded a battle that should have been impossible, held a position that should have fallen, survived a night that seemed designed to kill everyone in the castle. The exhaustion is there, bone deep, waiting to claim him the moment he stops moving. But he cannot stop yet. There are forms to fill out, reports to file, the bureaucratic machinery of the American military demanding its documentation even in these chaotic final days. The army wants to know what happened at Castle Itter, and Jack Lee is one of the few people who can explain. He begins to reconstruct the timeline. The approach to the castle, the first contact with the prisoners, the setup of defensive positions. The arrival of German soldiers who became his allies, the long night of waiting, the attack that came with the dawn, the desperate fighting that followed. He describes the weapons his force used, the ammunition they expended, the casualties they inflicted and the casualties they suffered. He explains how his tank crew kept the besotted Jenny fighting until she could fight no more, how the gunner and loader transitioned to small arms when the main gun fell silent, how every man in his small force did everything that could be asked of them and more. The relief force officers take notes, ask questions, piece together an understanding of the engagement that they will carry up the chain of command. But even as Lee provides the military details, the numbers, the positions, the tactical decisions, he knows that the reports will not capture what actually happened here. They will not capture the feeling of extending trust to an enemy officer, of gambling everything on the word of a man you have been trained to kill. They will not capture the strangeness of watching German soldiers take up positions alongside your own men, of hearing German voices calling out targets and warnings in a language most Americans could not understand. They will not capture the moment when the SS attacked, and the differences between Americans and Germans stopped mattering, when everyone on those walls became simply defenders, brothers united against an enemy that wanted them all dead. The reports will document an engagement. They will not document the human transformation that occurred within that engagement, the way that enemies became allies and suspicion became trust in the crucible of combat. The French prisoners begin to depart. Vehicles have been arranged, escorts assigned, the machinery of liberation grinding into motion. Paul Reynaud pauses before leaving, seeking out the Americans who defended the castle, thanking them in French that most of them cannot understand but all of them appreciate. These young men from Pennsylvania and Ohio and Texas, these soldiers who could have stayed safely behind American lines on the war's last day, they risked everything to rescue people they had never met. People who represented a nation and a cause rather than personal relationships. Reynaud wants them to know that France will remember. He wants them to know that what they did matters, that the sacrifice and the courage and the impossible alliance they formed will not be forgotten. Edouard Daladier departs with fewer words. His relationship with history is more complicated, his legacy more contested. But he too pauses, he too acknowledges the men who saved him, he too carries with him into the vehicle that will take him to freedom a debt that cannot be repaid. The Americans watch him go. This man whose decisions contributed to the war that brought them here. This man whose signature on the Munich Agreement is taught in history classes as an example of how not to conduct diplomacy. They do not judge him. They do not have the energy or the inclination to judge. He was a prisoner who needed rescuing, so they rescued him. What he did before, what he will do after, these are questions for historians and politicians, not for exhausted soldiers who just want to sleep. General Weygand requires assistance to enter the vehicle, his elderly body finally acknowledging its limits. General Gamelin follows, dignified even in exhaustion, maintaining the bearing of a senior officer even though his military career ended in defeat years ago. Jean Borotra, the athlete, moves with more energy than the older prisoners, but even he shows the strain of the night. One by one, the French prisoners leave Castle Itter, heading toward an uncertain future that is nevertheless preferable to the certain death they faced hours ago. The castle begins to empty. The American soldiers who came with the relief force take up garrison duties, establishing the security that will be needed until higher command decides what to do with this medieval fortress and its complicated history. The original defenders, Lee and his men, begin preparing for their own departure. They have been fighting for a long time across France and Germany and now Austria, and the war is ending. The relief force will handle whatever comes next. First Lieutenant Jack Lee and his crew have done enough, but before he leaves, Lee takes a final walk through the castle. He stands in the courtyard where his tank fought until it could fight no more. He walks the walls where his men held their positions through the long night. He looks out at the forest where the SS formed up for their attack, where so many German soldiers died trying to breach defences held by a handful of Americans and an even smaller handful of German turncoats. The morning light falls on everything. The beauty of the Tyrolean Alps, the medieval stonework of the castle, the scattered evidence of the battle that just ended. It is, in its way, a perfect setting for the improbable story that unfolded here. A castle from the Middle Ages, a battle fought with weapons of modern warfare, and an alliance that defied everything the war had taught its participants, about who their friends and enemies were. He thinks about Major Gangle. He barely knew the man. Their association was measured in hours rather than days, in tactical conversations rather than personal confidences. But Gangle trusted him, and he trusted Gangle, and that mutual trust held when it mattered. The German major came to the Americans because he believed they would help, because he recognized that the war was lost and the only thing left to do was save lives. He could have surrendered quietly, could have waited in some safe location for American forces to sweep through and collect him as a prisoner. Instead, he chose to act. He chose to risk himself leading Americans into what everyone understood might be a trap. He chose to fight alongside men who were his enemies by every formal measure, and he chose to die protecting one of the prisoners he came to save. First Lieutenant Lee does not know what will happen to Gangle's memory. He does not know whether the German major will be celebrated or forgotten, honoured or ignored. The war has produced too many stories, too many heroes and villains and people who are both at different moments. But Jack Lee knows what he saw. He knows what Josef Gangle did. And he knows that whatever else this war means, whatever history decides about the great campaigns and the political decisions and the strategic turning points, there was one German officer in the Tyrolean Alps who chose to be better than the regime he served. There was one German officer who proved that the uniform does not determine the man, that choices remain possible even in the most constrained circumstances, that courage and honour can emerge in unexpected places. The morning wears on, the evacuation continues, the administrative machinery of the American military begins to process what happened at Castle Itter, to assign it a place in the vast archive of World War II engagements. Somewhere, paperwork is being filed. Somewhere, reports are being typed. Somewhere, the strange battle of May 5th, 1945 is becoming a matter of record rather than lived experience. But for the men who fought it, for the Americans and Germans who stood together on those walls, the battle remains vivid and immediate. They carry it in their bodies, in the aches and bruises and the exhaustion that sleep will only partially remedy. They carry it in their minds, in the images of the night, the sounds of combat, the faces of men who fought beside them, and the faces of enemies who tried to kill them. They carry it in their understanding of what war is and what it can become when the rigid categories break down and individual choice replaces institutional imperative. First, Lieutenant John Lee climbs into a vehicle that will take him away from Castle Itter. He looks back once, at the medieval walls still standing, at the Austrian mountains rising beyond. He is 24 years old. He has just commanded one of the strangest engagements of the Second World War. He has fought alongside Germans against Germans, rescued French politicians and generals, held an impossible position through a night that seemed certain to end in his death. In a few days, the war in Europe will officially end. The killing will stop, or mostly stop. There will still be chaos and score settling and the inevitable violence that accompanies any collapse of order. But the formal war, the great conflict that brought him from America to the fields of France to the mountains of Austria, that war is ending. The vehicle pulls away from the castle. The forest closes in around the road, green and alive and indifferent to the human dramas that just played out beneath its canopy. Somewhere in that forest, SS soldiers are still moving, fleeing toward the mountains, hoping to escape the justice that awaits them, or perhaps still believing that the Reich can be saved through continued resistance. They are remnants of a dream that became a nightmare, true believers in a cause that history has already judged. They attacked Castle Itter because they could not accept that the war was over, could not accept that prisoners who posed no military threat should be allowed to live. They failed. The castle held. The prisoners escaped. And the defenders who should have been enemies fought as allies through the night that would define the rest of their lives. The convoy winds through valleys that have known war for centuries. The Tyrolean Alps have watched armies pass beneath their peaks since before recorded history. Roman legions, medieval knights, Napoleonic columns, and now the mechanized forces of the greatest conflict the world has ever seen. The mountains do not care. They stand as they have always stood, snow-capped and eternal, while empires rise and fall in the valleys below. For the French prisoners riding in American vehicles, this journey represents the end of a captivity that stretched across years. Paul Renault stares out at the passing landscape, seeing it as a free man for the first time since 1940. 5 years. 5 years since he stood before the French cabinet and argued for continued resistance. 5 years since his government collapsed around him, and the Germans took him into custody. He was Prime Minister of France when the Wehrmacht swept through the Ardennes. He watched his nation fall. He spent the war years being moved from prison to prison, castle to castle, always a valuable hostage, always a bargaining chip that the Reich might use if negotiations ever became necessary. Now, in a strange twist that no novelist would dare invent, he owes his life to American soldiers who trusted a German officer, to a mixed force of enemies who became allies for a single night. Edouard Daladier rides in a separate vehicle, his thoughts his own. He signed the Munich Agreement in 1938, standing beside Chamberlain and Hitler and Mussolini in that photograph that would come to symbolize appeasement. History has not been kind to him for that signature. History may never be kind to him, but he is alive. He survived imprisonment, survived the SS, survived a night when fanatical soldiers attacked the castle where he was held. Whatever judgment awaits him in France, he will face it as a living man rather than a martyr. The Germans could have executed their French prisoners at any point during the war. They chose not to, calculating that living hostages held more value than dead symbols. Now that calculation has delivered him into American hands, and the complicated process of returning to a France he barely recognizes can begin, General Maxime Weygand watches the American soldiers with the professional eye of a man who spent his life in uniform. He commanded the French army in its final desperate days, took over from Gamelin when the situation was already hopeless, presided over the armistice that ended French resistance. Some call him a defeatist. Others argue he had no choice, that the battle was lost before he ever took command. Weygand has had years to consider these arguments, years of imprisonment to replay those terrible weeks of May and June 1940. The Americans who rescued him are young, confident, competent, everything the French army was supposed to be and wasn't when it mattered most. He does not know what role remains for him in the post-war world. He does not know whether France will welcome him back or condemn him. But he knows that these American soldiers fought through a night that could have killed them all, and he respects the professionalism he witnessed even in that chaotic improvised defence. General Maurice Gamelin, who commanded the French army when the Germans struck, who bears perhaps the heaviest burden of responsibility for the catastrophic defeat, says little during the journey. His health declined during captivity. His spirit broke under the weight of knowing that history would remember him as the general who failed France in her hour of greatest need. The Americans treat him with the same courtesy they extend to all the prisoners, unaware of the complex web of recrimination and blame that surrounds French military leadership. To them, he is simply an elderly general who needed rescuing. To France, he is a symbol of everything that went wrong. The journey to freedom is also for Gamelin a journey toward a reckoning he has long dreaded. Michel Clemenceau sits among the freed prisoners, the son of the great Georges Clemenceau who led France to victory in the First World War. His father was the Tiger, the man who refused to accept defeat, who drove the French war effort to final triumph in 1918. Michel carries that legacy like a weight around his neck. He was imprisoned because of his name, because the Germans understood the symbolic value of holding the son of the man who crushed them a generation ago. Now he is free, and he must return to a France that has been through its own crucible, a France that collaborated and resisted in equal measure, a France that will spend decades sorting through the moral complexities of the occupation years. Jean Borotra, the tennis champion, the bounding Basque who thrilled Wimbledon crowds in the 1920s and 1930s, flexes his hands as the vehicle bounces along the mountain road. He leaped over the castle wall at dawn to sprint toward the advancing American forces, risking death to speed the relief column's arrival. He is 56 years old, far past his athletic prime, but the reflexes that made him a champion served him well when it mattered most. He ran through territory where SS soldiers might have been waiting, ran toward Americans who might have shot him as a German collaborator, ran because action was the only response he knew to impossible circumstances. The athlete's instinct for decisive movement, for committing fully to a chosen course, served him better than any political calculation could have. Marie-Agnès Caillot rides in one of the vehicles, her thoughts reaching toward her brother Charles, whom she has not seen in years. General de Gaulle led the Free French from London, became the symbol of French resistance, built the movement that would carry him to leadership of the liberated nation. She was imprisoned because of that connection, held as a hostage against her brother's continued defiance. Now she will rejoin him, and she will have stories to tell, of SS guards and medieval walls, of American tanks and German soldiers who chose honour over orders, of a night when the war's last gasps nearly claimed her life. The convoy reaches American lines proper, and the prisoners are transferred to more secure transportation. The military machine that liberated them now absorbs them into its administrative processes. There are medical examinations to conduct, identifications to verify, reports to file. The prisoners are valuable, politically, symbolically, practically. Their testimony about conditions in German captivity will become part of the historical record. Their mere survival represents a propaganda victory, proof that the Nazis failed to break France's spirit even after years of imprisonment. First Lieutenant Jackley does not accompany the prisoners on their journey to freedom. His duty lies with his unit, with the men who fought beside him through the night. The battle at Castle Itter has ended, but the war has not officially ceased. There are still operations to conduct, still territory to secure, still SS remnants to root out and capture. The euphoria of survival gives way to the practical necessities of soldiering. Lee gathers his men, the survivors of his small tank crew, the soldiers who held the walls through the long night. They are exhausted in ways that sleep alone cannot remedy. Combat leaves marks that take years to fade, if they fade at all. The sounds of that night will echo in their memories for decades. The smell of cordite and stone dust and fear will return to them unbidden in peaceful moments. They will wake from dreams of machine gun fire and mortar explosions, their bodies responding to threats that exist only in memory. But they are alive, they held, and they did something that seemed impossible when they first agreed to follow a German officer into enemy territory. They rescued prisoners who represented the highest levels of French political and military leadership, men whose survival matters to the reconstruction of Europe. They proved that individual courage can still matter even in a war of massive armies and industrial killing. They demonstrated that moral choices remain possible even in the final chaotic days of a collapsing regime. The paperwork begins. Military bureaucracy requires documentation, and the strange circumstances of the Castle Itter engagement demand explanation. Lee will spend hours reconstructing the timeline, describing the decisions he made and why he made them. He will explain why he trusted Major Gangel, why he agreed to the mission, why he positioned his men as he did throughout the defence. The reports will become part of the official record, preserved in archives where future historians can access them and piece together what happened on that May night in the Tyrolean Alps. Major Gangel's body receives the attention that military protocols demand. He was an enemy soldier, technically, a Wehrmacht officer who had spent years fighting for Germany. But he died fighting alongside Americans, protecting a French prisoner from the SS. The category confusion that surrounded him in life continues in death. How do you classify a German officer who died heroically in an American operation? What medals does he deserve? Which nation honours his sacrifice? These questions will take years to answer. Austria, once it establishes itself as a nation separate from Germany, will eventually recognise Gangel as a hero of the resistance. The town of Wörgl will name a street after him, and his grave will become a place of pilgrimage for those who study this period of history. But in the immediate aftermath of the battle, his body is simply another casualty to be processed, another death to be recorded in the vast accounting of the war's final days. The surviving German soldiers who fought alongside Lee face their own uncertain futures. They chose to resist the SS, to ally themselves with Americans against their countrymen. In a war defined by rigid categories of friend and enemy, they stepped outside the prescribed roles. Some will face suspicion from American authorities who cannot quite believe that Wehrmacht soldiers could genuinely oppose the Nazi regime. Others will find that their resistance credentials smooth their path through the denazification process. The choice they made at Castle Itter will ripple through the rest of their lives in ways they cannot yet predict. For the American soldiers, the battle becomes a story they will carry with them into civilian life. Most will return home within a year, discharged into a peacetime economy that needs their labour. They will take jobs, marry, raise families, build the post-war America that their victory made possible. And sometimes, at reunions or in quiet moments, they will tell the story of the night they fought alongside Germans against Germans, the night they held a medieval castle against fanatical SS troops, the night that everything they thought they knew about war proved more complicated than anyone had taught them. The war in Europe has 3 more days to run, though no one knows the precise timing yet. Negotiations continue. German commanders in various sectors surrender their forces piecemeal. The great machine of war grinds toward its halt, but the grinding takes time. In those final days, men continue to die, killed in firefights that change nothing, caught by artillery that serves no strategic purpose, executed by SS units that refuse to accept reality. Each death is a tragedy, a life cut short for no reason except the institutional momentum of a conflict that has already been decided. The prisoners from Castle Itter begin their journeys home. The routes differ, some will fly, others will travel by ground transport, but all lead toward a France that must somehow reconstruct itself from the ruins of occupation. Charles de Gaulle has established himself as the leader of the provisional government, but his authority is contested, his vision for France's future resisted by those who prefer different paths. The men and women freed from Castle Itter will step into this contested political landscape, their voices carrying weight because of who they are and what they survived. Renaud and Daladier, bitter rivals before the war, will continue their rivalry afterward. Each believes the other bears responsibility for France's collapse. Each will spend the rest of his life defending his own decisions and attacking his opponents. The imprisonment they shared does not make them friends. The liberation they experienced together does not heal the wounds of 1940. They emerge from Castle Itter as free men, but as the same men they were when they entered captivity, proud, accomplished, flawed, and convinced of their own righteousness. Weygand and Gamelin face similar futures. Both will be investigated for their roles in the defeat, their decisions scrutinized by commissions and courts. Weygand will be tried for collaboration, his actions during the Vichy period adding complexity to his legacy. Gamelin will largely avoid prosecution, but never escape the historical judgment that his command failures contributed to France's catastrophe. Neither will regain the prominence they once held. Neither will reshape the story that history tells about them, but they are alive to face whatever comes. The S troops who attacked Castle Itter intended to kill them, to eliminate them before they could testify, before they could return to France, before they could reclaim any role in public life. That intention failed. The improvised alliance of Americans and Germans held the castle through the night. The relief column arrived in time. The prisoners escaped. Whatever else happens, whatever judgments history renders, the men and women of Castle Itter were given the chance to face their futures rather than dying in a medieval fortress as the Reich collapsed. May 5th, 1945 passes into May 6th. The formal surrender negotiations intensify. German commanders recognize that continued resistance serves no purpose, that every hour of fighting produces only unnecessary casualties. In various sectors across Europe, local ceasefires take hold. The shooting slows, the dying diminishes, but it does not stop entirely, not yet. First Lieutenant Jack Lee does not know how the war will end or when. He knows only that his immediate mission is complete. The prisoners are safe, his men survived, the castle held. He has done what he came to do. The rest is administration and waiting. He writes letters to family, to friends, to the people back home who have followed his war through censored correspondence. He cannot tell them everything. Military censorship still applies, and besides, some experiences resist description. How do you explain to someone who wasn't there what it felt like to trust a German officer with your life? How do you describe the sound of mortars hitting medieval walls while you crouched behind stone that was old when Columbus sailed? How do you convey the bone-deep exhaustion of a night that seemed certain to end in your death? You don't really. You tell the stories you can tell, the funny moments, the strange coincidences, the human details that translate across the distance between combat and peace. You leave out the parts that resist words. You trust that the people who love you will understand that there are things you cannot say, experiences that you carry alone because sharing them would require a common frame of reference that civilians simply don't have. The military bureaucracy continues its work. Awards are recommended, promotions processed, casualties recorded. The Battle of Castle Itter enters the official record as a minor engagement in the war's final days, significant mainly because of the prisoners involved, noteworthy for its unusual alliance but not strategically important. The great histories of World War II will mostly ignore it, focusing instead on the massive operations that decided the conflict's outcome. Castle Itter will become a footnote, a curiosity, a story that people discover by accident and can hardly believe. But for those who were there, Americans and Germans and French prisoners, the battle remains central to their understanding of what war means and what it can become. They learned something on those walls that no textbook teaches. They discovered that the categories war imposes, friend, enemy, ally, adversary, are human constructions that human choices can override. They proved that courage matters, that honour survives even in the most dishonourable circumstances, that people can be better than the causes they serve. The forest around Castle Itter returns to its ancient silence. The sounds of battle fade, the smoke clears, the spent cartridges and shattered stone remain as physical evidence of what happened, but the forest is already beginning its slow work of reclamation. Moss will grow over the scars, rain will wash away the bloodstains, seasons will pass and the castle will heal itself the way it has healed from previous conflicts across centuries of Tyrolean history. The human healing takes longer. It always does. The prisoners carry their liberation forward into lives that the war interrupted but could not destroy. They will serve France in various capacities, contribute what they can to reconstruction, face whatever judgments their countrymen render. Some will regain prominence, others will fade into obscurity. All will carry the memory of Castle Itter with them, the night the SS came to kill them, and an impossible alliance stood in the way. The American soldiers carry their victory forward into futures they can finally imagine. The war is ending. They will go home. They will resume lives that military service interrupted. Some will thrive in peacetime, their wartime experiences providing confidence and perspective that serve them well in civilian competition. Others will struggle to readjust, finding that the skills combat taught them have no peaceful application, that the intensity of war makes ordinary life feel pale and meaningless. Jack Lee carries forward the memory of Joseph Gangl, the German major who became an ally, the enemy officer who died protecting a prisoner he had no obligation to save. Lee will think about Gangl for the rest of his life, return to that moment when a man in German uniform approached American tanks and proposed something that should have been impossible. He will wonder what combination of conscience and courage led Gangl to that choice, what internal transformation enabled a Wehrmacht officer to reject the cause he had served and embrace, instead a simple human duty to protect innocent life. These questions have no easy answers. Human motivation resists simple explanation. Gangl's choice emerged from a lifetime of experiences that no one else can fully access. His upbringing, his beliefs, his encounters with Nazi ideology and its consequences. Something in him rebelled against the regime's demands. Something in him recognized that orders are not ethics, that uniforms do not determine moral worth, that even in the final days of a losing war, choices remain possible, and those choices define who we are. The night passes. The dawn comes. The war continues its ending, each hour bringing the formal surrender closer. In 3 days, the documents will be signed that conclude the European war. In 3 days, the killing will officially stop. But the meanings of what happened will take decades to emerge, generations to understand. The Battle of Castle Itter will wait in the archives, a small story containing vast implications, a minor engagement revealing major truths about what human beings can become when circumstances force them to choose between orders and honour, between ideology and humanity, between the war they were fighting and the peace they wanted to build. The morning of May 6, 1945, arrives over the Tyrolean Alps with the particular clarity that follows violence. The air is clean, the sky is pale blue, streaked with the first gold of sunrise. Castle Itter stands against the mountains, its medieval walls scarred by fresh bullet holes, its courtyard littered with the debris of combat, its defenders exhausted but alive. The battle is over, the siege has been lifted, the prisoners are free. Jack Lee sits on the castle steps, his Thompson submachine gun across his knees, and watches the sun rise over Austria. He has not slept in more than 30 hours. His uniform is torn and blackened with powder residue. His hands still tremble slightly from the sustained adrenaline of combat. Around him, his men are doing what soldiers do when fighting stops, checking weapons, treating minor wounds, sharing cigarettes, staring at nothing. The transition from combat to calm is never instantaneous. The body keeps producing chemicals meant for survival long after survival is secured. The French prisoners emerge from the cellar where they spent the night's worst hours, blinking in the morning light like men awakening from a shared nightmare. Paul Renault crosses the courtyard to where Lee sits and extends his hand. The former Prime Minister of France, the man who appointed Charles de Gaulle to his cabinet, the leader who tried to rally his nation against Nazi invasion and failed, now stands before a 25-year-old American lieutenant from upstate New York and offers the only currency that truly matters between soldiers: respect. "Lieutenant," Renaud says, "what you have done here, what all of you have done, France will not forget." Lee shakes the offered hand. He is too tired for eloquence, too drained for ceremony. "We just did our job, sir," he says. It is the standard soldier's deflection, the reflexive modesty that combat veterans employ when confronted with gratitude they do not know how to accept. But even as he says it, Lee knows it is not entirely true. Nothing about Castle Itter was just doing his job. His job did not include trusting German officers. His job did not include mounting rescue operations without orders. His job did not include defending medieval castles with a handful of men against overwhelming force. What happened here exceeded any definition of duty he brought to the war. Edouard Daladier approaches next. The man who signed the Munich Agreement, the man history has already begun to judge harshly for his role in appeasing Hitler, carries himself with the dignity of one who has had years to contemplate his decisions and their consequences. He has spent years as a prisoner, watching the war he failed to prevent consume the continent he failed to protect. Now he stands in a castle courtyard surrounded by American soldiers who were children when he was signing treaties, and he must reckon with the strange circularity of history, that these young men crossed an ocean to finish what his generation could not contain. "You have given us our lives," Daladier tells Lee. "We will spend them trying to be worthy of the gift." General Weygand, 80 years old and still bearing himself with military precision despite years of captivity, surveys the battlefield with a professional eye. He notes the defensive positions, the angles of fire, the improvised fortifications. He calculates the odds that Lee and his men faced and recognizes the mathematical improbability of their survival. "A textbook defense," he murmurs, half to himself, "against superior numbers with mixed forces in an unfamiliar position. Remarkable." General Gamelin says little. He has spent years in captivity, first in Germany, then in this castle, watching the war unfold without him. He was France's supreme commander when the Wehrmacht swept through his lines in May 1940, and he has lived with that failure ever since. Now he watches young American soldiers clean their weapons and joke with each other in a language he does not fully understand, and he must reconcile his own military career with the evidence before him, that war is not only a matter of strategy and logistics, but of will, of improvisation, of individual courage that no planning can account for. Marie-Agnès de Gaulle moves through the courtyard with quiet purpose, helping where she can, offering water and bandages to wounded men regardless of their nationality. She has spent years as a hostage, a pawn in Nazi calculations about her brother's loyalty, a symbol manipulated by men who did not care about her humanity. Now she reclaims agency through small acts of kindness, tending wounds, speaking comfort, being useful. She will not discuss her own ordeal. She will deflect questions about the conditions of her captivity, the fears she endured, the uncertainties that haunted her nights. What matters now is the future, not the past. What matters is France, not herself. Jean Borotra, the bounding Basque, paces the courtyard with the restless energy of an athlete confined too long. His dramatic leap over the castle wall to summon reinforcements has already become part of the battle's mythology, a moment of athletic heroism that seems almost scripted for cinematic adaptation. But Borotra himself dismisses any praise for his exploit. "I simply ran," he will say later. "Running is what I know how to do. The courage belonged to those who stayed and fought." Michel Clemenceau, son of the Tiger of France, stands apart from the others, watching the Americans with an expression difficult to read. His father won the First World War through sheer force of will, demanding that France fight to the last man, refusing any compromise with Germany. Now the son has witnessed Germans fighting alongside Americans to save French prisoners, and he must reconcile this impossible tableau with everything his father believed about German character and French destiny. The world has become more complicated than his father's certainties allowed. Perhaps it always was. The castle's Austrian staff, cooks and servants who endured the siege alongside the prisoners, begin the slow work of cleaning up. They sweep broken glass. They collect spent cartridges. They assess damage to walls and furnishings that have stood for centuries. For them, the castle is not a symbol, but a workplace, a structure that must be maintained regardless of who owns it, or what battles are fought within its walls. They have survived previous conflicts. They will survive this one's aftermath. The bodies of the fallen Waffen-SS soldiers lie where they dropped, scattered across the approaches to the castle like dark punctuation marks on the green landscape. No one has begun collecting them yet. No one is quite sure whose responsibility that task will be. The Nazi dead wait in the morning sun, their cause lost, their fanaticism ended, their final attack repulsed by an alliance they could never have imagined. Josef Gangel's body has been brought inside the castle. Someone, no one remembers who, covered him with a blanket, a small gesture of respect for the enemy officer who became something else in his final hours. Lee walks over to where Gangel lies and stands in silence for a long moment. He does not know the proper protocol. He does not know whether enemies can be mourned, whether respect for the dead transcends the categories that separated the living. He knows only that Gangel deserved better than the war gave him, that a man who chose conscience over orders should not have died in the war's final hours, that there is something fundamentally unjust about survival being so randomly distributed. "He was a good man," Lee says finally, to no one in particular. "The only German I ever trusted, and he turned out to be exactly what he said he was." The relief column that arrived at dawn has brought news from the wider war. Berlin has fallen. Hitler is dead. The German government is negotiating surrender. The European war is ending, not in some dramatic final battle, but in slow collapse, pockets of resistance flickering out like candles in a drafty room. Castle Itter was one of those candles, a last flare of combat in a conflict already decided, a final engagement that meant everything to those who fought it, and almost nothing to the war's larger outcome. But meaning is not measured only in strategic significance. The Battle of Castle Itter meant something that transcended military calculation. It demonstrated what human beings can become when ideological frameworks crack and individual choice becomes possible again. It proved that enemies are not permanent categories, that allegiances can shift when conscience demands, that the uniforms men wear do not determine the choices they make. The prisoners begin preparing to leave. They have been captives for years, some of them since 1940, and the prospect of freedom is both exhilarating and terrifying. They do not know what France has become in their absence. They do not know how they will be received, as heroes who resisted or as failures who capitulated. They do not know whether their families survived, whether their homes still stand, whether the France they left still exists in any recognizable form. Freedom after prolonged captivity is not simple liberation. It is a new uncertainty replacing an old one, the unknown future substituting for the known imprisonment. Paul Reynaud will return to French politics, his wartime imprisonment lending him a credibility that his pre-war appeasement might have destroyed. He will serve in the post-war governments, contribute to French reconstruction, live until 1966. He will write his memoirs, tell his version of events, defend his decisions with the eloquence that made him one of France's most gifted orators. But he will never forget Castle Itter, the night the SS came to kill him, and an American lieutenant said no. Edouard Daladier will return to a more complicated reception. History has already begun judging him for Munich, for the agreement that bought peace at the cost of Czechoslovakia and ultimately purchased nothing at all. He will spend the rest of his life defending himself, explaining the pressures he faced, arguing that his choices made sense given what he knew at the time. The verdict will never fully clear him, but he will serve France again in the National Assembly and as Mayor of Avignon, contributing what he can to the nation he failed to protect. He will die in 1970, still remembered more for his defeat than for his survival, more for his signature on a document than for his courage under siege. General Weygand will return to a nation that is not sure what to make of him. He commanded the French armies that surrendered in 1940. He served the Vichy government before his own arrest. His loyalties are complicated, his record ambiguous. He will face charges of collaboration, be convicted, be pardoned. He will spend his final years writing military histories, analysing campaigns, explaining his decisions to audiences who were not there when he made them. He will die in 1965, 98 years old, one of the last living links to the military traditions of 19th century France. General Gamelin will return to obscurity. He commanded the French armies when they collapsed. He bears responsibility that no explanation can fully discharge. He will live quietly after the war, write his memoirs, die in 1958 without ever fully recovering the reputation that May 1940 destroyed. Castle Itter will be a footnote in his story, a final adventure that interrupted the long aftermath of his greatest failure. Marie-Agnès de Gaulle will return to her brother, to the man who led Free France and will soon lead France itself. She will never trade on her relationship to power. She will live quietly, privately, without seeking the spotlight that her family name might have provided. Her ordeal at Castle Itter will become a small part of the vast de Gaulle mythology, a detail that biographers mention in passing, without fully exploring what it meant to be a hostage in Hitler's Europe. A woman used as leverage against a brother she could not contact, a symbol whose humanity was irrelevant to those who held her. Jean Borotra will return to tennis, then to sports administration, serving France in various athletic capacities, while his wartime record remains complicated by his service to Vichy. He will live until 1994, the last survivor of the Castle Itter prisoners, carrying the memory of that night longer than anyone else who shared it. In his 90s, he will still remember the leap over the wall, the run through the forest, the desperate hope that help would arrive in time. Michel Clemenceau will return to the legacy his father created and the shadow his father cast. He will serve France in various capacities, always conscious that he is Georges Clemenceau's son before he is anything else. He will die in 1964, having spent his entire adult life being someone's descendant rather than someone in his own right. The Americans face a different kind of homecoming. The war is ending. They will go back to a country that has been at war for nearly 4 years, a nation that has been mobilized and rationed and unified by common purpose. They will return to families who do not fully understand what they experienced, to communities that will celebrate their service without comprehending its cost, to a peacetime economy that will absorb them as workers and citizens without accounting for the ways combat has changed them. Jack Lee will receive the Distinguished Service Cross for his defence of Castle Itter. He will be recognised for extraordinary heroism in action, for courage beyond the call of duty, for exactly the kind of battlefield leadership that the army exists to reward. But medals do not answer the questions that combat raises. Medals do not explain why some men live and others die. Medals do not resolve the moral complexities of trusting enemies, or the strange guilt of surviving when better men did not. Lee will think about Josef Gangl for decades. He will wonder what made Gangl different from other German officers, what combination of experiences and values enabled him to see past the ideology that consumed his nation. He will never fully answer these questions. He will know only that Gangl existed, that such men are possible, that even in the most corrupted circumstances individual conscience can survive. The German soldiers who fought alongside Lee at Castle Itter will scatter into the chaos of post-war Austria. Some will find their way home. Others will spend months in prisoner-of-war camps, their participation in the castle's defence too small a detail to affect their treatment. Gangl's resistance contacts will help some of them. Others will simply disappear into the vast displacement of populations that follows total war. The Waffen-SS soldiers who attack the castle, those who survived the battle, will face various fates. Some will be captured and processed through Allied prisoner systems. Others will escape into the mountains and the confusion, finding sanctuary where they can, hoping to wait out the immediate aftermath before re-emerging into civilian identities. A few will continue fighting, joining the scattered resistance that persists for weeks after the formal surrender, refusing to accept that the cause they served is finished. The war ends 3 days after Castle Itter. On May 8, 1945, Germany signs the instruments of unconditional surrender. The European war is officially over, the killing officially stops, the rebuilding officially begins. But official endings are clean in ways that human experience never is. The trauma persists. The questions remain. The memories do not fade simply because documents are signed in Reims and Berlin. Castle Itter returns to its previous existence as a hotel and private residence. The bullet holes are patched. The damage is repaired. Tourists visit without knowing what happened within these walls. The castle's medieval history is emphasized. The Battle of May 5, 1945 becomes a footnote, then an obscure detail, then nearly forgotten entirely. For decades, the Battle of Castle Itter receives little historical attention. It does not fit the narratives that dominate World War II memory. It is too small to matter strategically, too strange to fit conventional categories, too complicated to reduce to simple lessons. Americans and Germans fighting together against other Germans to save French prisoners, the sentence itself resists easy comprehension. Historians mentioned it in passing, if at all. But history has a way of recovering what it initially ignores. In 2013, Stephen Harding publishes The Last Battle, a comprehensive account based on archival research and survivor interviews. The book brings Castle Itter to public attention for the first time. Readers discover a story they have never heard, an engagement that challenges everything they thought they knew about World War II's final days. The story resonates because it speaks to something permanent in human nature: the possibility of transcendence, the capacity to exceed categorical limitations, the hope that even in the worst circumstances individual choice remains possible. Castle Itter proves that enemies can become allies when circumstances and conscience align. It proves that courage is not the property of any nation or ideology, but a human capacity available to anyone willing to exercise it. Major Josef Gangl is honoured in his homeland. A street in his hometown of Oberudorf bears his name. A memorial stone marks his contribution to Austrian resistance against Nazi rule. He is remembered as a man who chose conscience over orders, humanity over ideology, death over complicity. His sacrifice gave meaning to his life in ways that survival might not have achieved. He died the person he wanted to be. The forest around Castle Itter has grown back over the battle's scars. The trees that absorbed bullets and shrapnel have healed or fallen and been replaced. The ground that soaked up blood has processed that organic matter through decades of natural cycles. The landscape remembers nothing. Only human memory preserves what happened here, and human memory is fragile, selective, mortal. The survivors die one by one. The witnesses disappear. The battle passes from living memory into archival record, from personal experience into historical narrative. What was once vivid becomes researched. What was once felt becomes described. But something survives the transition. Not the specific memories, the exact sound of the machine guns, the precise fear of that night, the particular exhaustion of that morning, but the meanings those experiences generated, the knowledge that enemies can become allies, the proof that conscience can survive ideology, the evidence that human beings are not simply products of the uniforms they wear or the causes they serve, but moral agents capable of choice even in circumstances designed to eliminate choice. Castle Itter stands in the Tyrolean Alps as it has stood for centuries, a stone structure indifferent to the human dramas it has housed. The mountains rise beyond it, unchanged by the war that swept through their valleys. The forest surrounds it, regenerating season after season without regard for the battles fought beneath its canopy. The natural world offers no verdicts, no judgments, no interpretations. But human beings require meaning. We cannot experience events without seeking their significance. We cannot witness sacrifice without asking what it was for. We cannot encounter courage without wondering whether we possess it ourselves. The Battle of Castle Itter provides answers to questions that most of us will never face directly. It tells us that the boundaries between enemies are not absolute. It tells us that moral choice persists even when ideological pressure is overwhelming. It tells us that individual conscience can survive the systems designed to crush it. It tells us that at the very end, when all the orders and ideologies and categorical imperatives have exhausted themselves, what remains is simply human beings choosing who they want to be. Jack Lee chose to trust a German officer. Josef Gangl chose to approach American tanks. The French prisoners chose to fight for their own survival. The German soldiers who joined the defence chose conscience over country. Each choice was individual, personal, irreducible to larger forces. Each choice mattered. The morning light strengthens over Castle Itter. The survivors prepare for the journeys that will take them home, wherever home now is. The dead await burial. The war awaits its ending. The future awaits its unfolding. And somewhere in the stone walls of a medieval castle in the Austrian Alps, something human persists. Not as a ghost or a memory or a historical record, but as a possibility. The possibility that when everything else fails, when all the systems collapse and all the certainties dissolve, human beings can still choose, can still connect across the boundaries meant to divide them, can still recognize in supposed enemies the common humanity that ideology tries to deny. That is what Castle Itter teaches. That is what those walls remember. That is what the battle means now and always. The sun rises, the war ends, the story continues,